Well, hey there, Eastlake. It's Kristen, and I'm here with Peter, Gadd.
Hey everybody.
And this is going to be our Easter message discussion talk
Interview.
interview, April posting.
Yeah.
And I feel like I need to just preface this all by saying Peter suggested that we come and, to quote Peter, play jazz, right?
Yeah. I'm super musical, so it was a really great metaphor.
Me too. No, not at all. And this was very challenging for me because I am very used to I want things organized, I want things thought through, I want a plan. And we just decided to both come with some Easter bits or ideas to see how the other person kind of responds or what their thoughts are to it. So this might be a little different, or we could find out this is actually what we really do.
Yeah. We kind of want to just record a discussion about spring and Easter, and rather than like write it all out and to make it really, here's exactly what I think, we wanted to throw some ideas out at each other and to see what our responses were in the moment, as opposed to we record. It feels like often, Kristen, we're like, why don't we record that? That was a way better version of it than when we try to redo it down the road.
Yeah.
Like, let's try to have let's try to look like actors on a stage where we're genuinely responding to each other. So rather than do that, we're just going to genuinely respond to each other. And I wore my springtime shirt. I only got a
Mm-hmm.
couple of them that make it feel like I'm springy.
Peter's wearing
And
a green shirt. Good job.
oh yeah, for those of you listening, it's I have like one springtime shirt, and so I'm wearing that, and we're going to talk about spring, talk about Easter, talk about this holiday.
Yes. Um, and I should say that it's challenging for me too because I like to have my thoughts thought through. That's my personality, and it takes me a while sometimes to know what I think. So we'll see. Maybe I will have opinions or thoughts on what you say. Maybe I won't. Or maybe in 3 hours I'll be like, oh shoot, this
I
is what
should
I
have said that.
I should have said that.
Yeah, that's a common experience for me too.
Um, okay. Well, why don't you start by throwing out one of your bits or ideas that you've been thinking about as we have prepared or each kind of tried to think
Yeah.
through what are we talking about when we think April, Easter, springtime?
First question I had, it was really just kind of a question for you, is just how are you celebrating Easter?
Hmm.
And obviously that changed over the years. Like I used to obviously spend my Easter morning at 8 services. Is how that's. I mean, that's the part of my past. Within the last decade, I've gone to 8 church services on Sundays, Saturday services, Good Friday services. I know if you look around my house, there's lots of flower construction art happening right now. We're going to be doing some egg coloring. We had St. Patty's Day a couple weeks back, which is like our Easter Eve because it's like rainbows and green, and it's like the greatest. The leprechaun pees in the toilet, and
Oh.
Bennett, my 3-year-old, refuses to drink the milk that the leprechaun peed in, while the other kids laugh and they're like, "Okay, I'll drink the green milk."
Ew, you say green milk is the leprechaun peed in it?
No, my kids say that to my 3-year-old, and we're like, "Oh, the leprechaun, there's fairy dust in the milk or whatever," and the other kid's like,
Ew.
"He peed in it." So, anyways, Bennett
I
believes
wouldn't
it.
drink that either. Gross.
I get it. Yeah,
I'm with
he's pretty
Bennett.
literal right now. He did actually cry. He came home from preschool and he was like choking up, like lip quivering, because he was like, "I don't want the leprechaun to pinch me on St. Patrick's Day." And I was like, "Oh," I was trying to teach him what a metaphor is and myth, and he's not quite there for 3 year olds. So
Mm.
all that preamble to ask you,
Yeah,
what are you bringing to Easter Sunday or the Easter holiday as a
yeah.
family?
It's interesting. My kids don't really remember going to Sunday morning services. They do remember East, like they remember the place where Amy Olson took care of them,
Yeah.
and there was a table of donuts. And
Yes.
but besides that, they were too young. So
Bouncy castles are a big thing in my
yeah,
family. Yeah.
yeah. So we will do the kind of American Christian thing, which is Easter egg hunts
Yes.
and an Easter bunny and dinner with family. Um, so yeah, and I remember kind of growing up and having thoughts when I was like in my there's a bald eagle flying outside my window right now.
That's
I just feel
amazing.
like I need to say that. I remember having like strong feelings when I was in my like evangelical zealous day of like Easter eggs are so pagan and nothing to do
Mm,
with Jesus. And I, having thoughts, strong feelings about that, and how
yeah,
we need to take back Easter for like what it really is about.
yeah,
And I don't
yeah.
feel that way anymore. I feel like very excited to celebrate spring and new life and all the joy that that brings with my kids. I'm not teaching my 5 and 7-year-old about capital punishment,
Not
and
not ever or not yet.
not yet.
Not yet.
We won't be talking about murder. Um,
That makes sense.
so I just don't feel like that's an appropriate thing to talk about yet.
Yeah.
Maybe someday we'll have that talk. My kids do know that they talk about how Jesus did die, um,
Hmm.
but it's not for the sake of atonement or anything like that in their minds.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, you brought up with me the idea, I feel like last time we were just chatting about how like associated Easter is with like how early did you hear the story that Jesus died, right? I heard that that is deep in the conscious, right? That is like birth, you hear that story, right?
Yeah.
Flannel graph for me in Sunday school.
Yeah.
And I remember a big part of like during my deconstruction window was like even I had a daughter, Tess is now 11 or 10, almost 11. And I was thinking like I have to tell this 3-year-old that Jesus needed to die for her. Because those
Yeah.
were some of the sentences that we heard, right? I know I specifically heard like if it was just you, man, you were the only person on the planet. It was just like fascinating to hear
Nails.
this, like, yeah, to say this, right?
Nails
Yeah.
through the body
Would
because
have
of you.
because of, test because you told Bennett the leprechaun peed in the milk. That's,
That's a lie.
whatever, right? Or a lie. Or, yeah,
Oh,
exactly. And so I think I appreciate you bringing up that, like, you're at least holding off on that as the main headline for Easter.
yeah.
It does bring up another topic. In light of playing jazz, Brittany and I were just chatting because, like, the if the headline for all of your reality is like what's the Bible say?
Mm.
Because we just had this conversation with a family member. The Bible says, spare the rod for the child, so you should spank a child. Like, I don't care what mental health professionals say.
Yeah.
And my wife is hearing this, who is a mental health professional, and she's like, "Nah." Like, how do I respond? Because we know that worldview. That worldview says the Bible is authoritative over science, right? If you're
Hmm.
in that space, um, like if like you have to tell your
Yeah.
children about that story because that's what the Bible says to do, as opposed to like what a mental health professional would say, like probably not appropriate to talk to your kindergartner yet. Just like you wouldn't want your kindergarten teacher to bring up capital punishment in class,
Yeah.
we might not want to bring that up in our families either at this age.
Yeah. Yeah. I think with everything, as I look through, like, as I sift through what's inside of me of Christianity, um, I sift it through a what is still true about that
Mm-hmm.
to me. And most of the truth never lies in, well, whether this happened or not,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's historical. I think what I look for is what is inherently true about what that's teaching us. I still think there's a lot of value in that. Sasha saying it in her book that we've been talking about for small creatures such as we. She wrote, so I read my book of Greek mythology as literature instead of history, even though to the Greeks, this was reality and
Mm-hmm.
history. And she says it's not so dissimilar to the way she looks at the Jewish texts that she grew up with. And I underlined this. She wrote, "This is what our ancestors believed. There is wisdom, insight, and poetry in it, but it's not what we believe." Um, that's what she wrote. And I think I approach biblical stories kind of like that now. Not, I still think there's the possibility that a lot of that there's historical truths and historical
Sure.
realities in there, but that either way, what matters to me is the wisdom and insight that still is applicable to me now.
What would you say are the bits of wisdom or the pieces that you would
For
hold on to
Easter.
for Easter? Yeah.
Okay, so I'm not going to
Got
answer for
more?
me. I'm going to answer what another thing that she wrote. Um, all these spring legends are about suffering and heartbreak giving way to joy. Each contains a secret, a hidden miracle, offering hope when all seems lost. This is spring itself. The themes of renewal, rebirth, resurrection, and rescue from death are not just religious ideals, but they're rituals inspired by the world that we live in still.
Yeah.
Um,
I love that. Beautiful idea that spring reminds us that death isn't, I mean, it's an inevitable experience for everything, but it's not
mhm.
the only experience, and that the death can often lead to new life,
Yeah,
whether it's a new chapter
yeah,
or something else. But I just like the idea that spring or Easter is a reminder of resurrection. Um, that's a beautiful idea, even
yeah.
if it's symbolic.
Well, I think that's what my kids can grasp right
Hmm.
now. So we do watch for blossoms coming out of what looks like a dead tree. I said that with
Yeah,
our talk with Felina, um, because these are foundations that can be metaphorical for them later.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, I think that's what stands out to me about Easter is that what looks like it might be dead um, may not be.
yeah. Even she referenced in the book the idea of an Easter egg, and even in that quote you read, the idea that there's like a hidden miracle somewhere, right?
Mhm.
Everything looks lost, there's suffering, there's pain, but there might be something hidden that is the seed to new life, right? But essentially, that's my interpretation of what she said, and I just love the idea of even like an Easter egg, right? Like finding an Easter egg is when it's something that we don't think there's anything there, but we find the egg, right? Even Easter eggs in movies or whatever, right? Like there's this hidden thing, right? In like Pixar movies, there's always these hidden references, right? The
And
idea
they
of
call
even in
them, yeah, they call
we call them
them
Easter eggs,
Easter
right?
eggs.
Like
Yeah.
there might be a source of something that's, you didn't know was there. And she mentioned in the book that it's just fascinating that Easter eggs are, I mean, they're certainly something that Christianity has adopted.
Hmm.
I've heard some people like reference it like to be connected to the tomb and to, Jesus came out of the tomb, which is
But crack
symbolic
it
of an egg.
open. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But it seems like it's very present in lots of cultures. So I don't think like Christianity started that tradition. It seems like that's been everywhere
And
throughout the ages.
adopted. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, she gives
Um,
examples of cultures and religions throughout history that have stories of eggs.
yeah.
And I think, yeah, what she references and what you just said is that, I mean, it's not the whole world for millennia has recognized that
Yeah.
life begins with an egg.
Right. Even, I mean, my brain was blown a little bit thinking about like even the concept of the Big Bang, which is the current leading theory on how we've arrived at this crazy experience of conscious humans theorizing how did we get here. All of life exploding from this one tiny little source
Yeah.
is an egg, right?
Yeah.
It's this fascinating, like the egg cracks, and here we are,
And here we
billions of
are.
years later.
Mm.
But the quote that I love from her book, the idea that life, maybe even all of life, emerges from an egg, seems to have made sense to people for eons. And I essentially see that just a beautiful concept within the Easter story, that life can emerge from death, and that but you have to like sometimes look for it, and then it might be hidden.
Hmm.
So I think it's a beautiful idea.
That is a
Another
beautiful
interesting idea from the book, and this isn't something that necessarily we need to dive into too much, but like there's so much fertility stuff all throughout
idea.
like traditions across everywhere. There's so many like religions and traditions. An idea of an egg is also a concept that's found, obviously, that's a fertility thing. So it's just fascinating that spring is also just so associated with that. Um,
Yeah.
do you have thoughts on fertility that you want to share with me? I usually have these conversations with you. No, I've chatted with Brittany a lot about fertility. I'm not sure we spend too much time on it, but it's certainly something that is a part of the springtime um, ritual.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because I have a conversation scheduled for a couple of weeks to talk
Great.
about fertility that we're going to record. But yeah, I think, do I have thoughts on fertility? Well, I mean, I just think there's hope when you see new life
Yeah.
and that it can be witnessed
Hmm.
and um, interestingly, it can even be planned
Yeah.
or unplanned. And I I underlined this thing that about talking about Easter bunnies. And it said the exact origins of this mythical mammal are unclear, but rabbits, known to be prolific procreators,
They're pretty good at it.
are an ancient symbol of fertility and new life.
Yeah.
As my husband's plotting how to destroy the bunnies that are
He's
over.
Mr. McGregor.
Oh, he
He's
is
full
Mr.
Peter.
McGregor. He's like has a plan, and my daughter is like ready to throw her body
Yeah.
in front of said plan to protect the bunnies that are infiltrating our yard. But
Do you think that's why bunny rabbits are associated with Easter? Is because of fertility?
I mean, that's one of the things that I read that
I
it.
I don't know. I've never thought about that for some reason, but that makes a lot of sense. Maybe everybody else knows this who's listening, and they're like, "Yeah, you're an idiot, Peter." But eggs have never. I'm like bunnies don't lay eggs, but I've always been like, "That's weird." I've never
Yeah,
connected the dots.
but like a symbol of new
Yeah,
life.
totally. They're
Um,
both symbols of that.
I think most Christians would probably be like, no, Jesus is
Yeah,
the symbol of new life.
exactly. It's another good symbol.
Yeah. Um, but I think there
It's
is.
hard to make a Jesus candy, or Jesus egg that I could eat. Like a bunny is way easier to eat than like a Jesus figurine. So
I have a picture of my daughter when she was like 3 and she had a Easter chocolate Easter bunny. And I have this
yeah,
picture of her because she was like, Mom, I'm gonna scrape the eyes out first with my teeth.
that's
And
amazing.
I have a picture of her holding this chocolate bunny with the literal like teeth marks across the face. And I'm like, ugh, a little bit,
That's amazing.
a little savage.
It's interesting even thinking through just, you know, pregnancy, having babies. We have, obviously, for those listening, I have 4 children and all born in May and June. So pretty much springtimey babies. And right now I have siblings. My sisters are having babies. It's crazy. There's going to be 4 more babies born into our world in 2023. Um, so one's already here, and then twins are on the way, and then another. Oh my gosh, just so many babies. And if you think about just and this isn't everybody's experience. So, in no way to say this is like, I understand that like not always is our babies symbolic of so much hope and so much newness, but often they are, right? Often just being around a baby makes you feel energized and hopeful for what's ahead, especially when you're not taking care of them. I feel like the more I'm around my nephews, they're like, oh my gosh, you have so much potential, right? Latent potential. Like, what's your life going to turn out to be? And I think when you're parenting, you're like, oh my God, I just hope this baby sleeps and I hope this baby eats. And you kind of are like buckled down. But I feel like in my current family experience, I'm reminded of how I think the whole like having babies during this season and experiencing new life during this season is just symbolic of being hopeful and choosing to like believe in potential as opposed to, I don't know, it feels like in this current climate, it's very easy to see that there's problems, right?
Mm.
and to have the potential that, or have the perspective that the future will be worse,
Mm.
right? And that even having babies is risky because of, name the problem, climate change and all the other things that are going on. It's encouraging to be around parents because at some level, when you choose to have a child, you are choosing to be optimistic about the future and hopeful,
Mm.
more often than not, right? So I guess I get kind of inspired by that. I do think you can kind of look for what you'll find what you look for, right? So if you want to look for all the problems with everything that's going on, you will certainly find them. And if you want to look for other things like human lifespan, or the remove like clean water for people and fewer people in poverty than ever, there's also some things to look for too that are hopeful and reason for optimism. So anyways, babies reminded me of that.
Yeah. I think it's also um, a reminder to me of just the cycle of life that we're all in,
Mm,
that there's newness and hope and optimism. And then there's also a circle of death, of
yeah.
dying and sadness and disbelief at what you're seeing. I think that's one of the great cycles and one of the great things that the Easter story pictures like so clearly of this. How in a matter of 4 days,
Hmm.
it can be high, it can be really low, and it can be high again. It's
Yeah.
celebrity and it's trial and death and complete despair, and then
Hmm.
um, wonder and disbelief and life again, and how it's just a cycle that um, Jesus apparently went through, and that we all do, and that life does, and our world
Yeah.
does. And it's very symbolic, whether you believe that really happened or not. It is symbolic of the life that we lead.
Hmm.
Hey Eastlake, Peter here. Thanks so much for tuning in to watch this message. I wanted to do just a quick interruption to say thank you to so many of you who are making regular contributions to Eastlake. Eastlake is a nonprofit, and everything that we do is because of a community of consistent and generous people who really believe in this place and want to see it continue. So if you're a part of that community, thank you for how you make this place go. If you are tuning in regularly and are part of this community but you haven't yet jumped in to making a financial contribution, we would encourage you to do that and encourage you to go to eastlakecc.com to help support Eastlake as a community and continue to make these messages possible. Thanks so much for letting me interrupt your message. Let's jump back in.
Reminds me of a quote somebody was talking about all the stuff that's going on when it comes to just like challenge in the world or collapses or companies going under, you name the problem. And his quote was, "Nothing's ever as good or as bad as it seems."
Mm.
So if you think about like Jesus's celebrity status, right? We know the story. It wasn't as good, right? It's actually part of the problem. And then his death, right? It's never as bad as it seems either. There's seeds for the next chapter after that.
Mm.
So I think in some ways, I don't want to be in a good season and be like, oh, like when's the shoe going to drop? It's always going to be bad. But I found it encouraging to know that when we're going through seasons of hardship, to just not lose hope.
Yeah. Um, I had something I wanted to ask
Yeah.
you about. Um, so I read a couple of things that this author wrote about Paul and Easter and resurrection. His name's Jay Perini, and he's just an American writer. And he wrote, I want to read this to you and then see what you think.
Yeah.
Okay, he says, it's so easy to misread Paul, especially the translations of the Greek into English are so overdetermined. Faith meant many things to Paul. He certainly understood it as resting in God, as trust in God's universe, where a kind of cosmic spirit undergirds and informs the world. And then this is the quote I wanted to ask you about. He believed in belief itself, which is giving oneself in love to an idea. Belief is, in fact, a version of Middle English word meaning to hold dearly. and Paul held dearly the transformations of the Spirit that Jesus modeled. So I guess I wanted to ask your thoughts on the idea of belief, meaning to hold dearly. And maybe what do you believe in or hold dearly?
What do I believe? Wow. I love that version of belief. That is such a, it just feels so much different than I think how like the current version of belief. Maybe that's part of my worldview. It tends to have a little bit of a negativity bias on the word belief, because believing in things that aren't, according to me, that I don't think are true, creates all sorts of pain and challenge. And so it doesn't feel like holding dearly, right? It's like that tone feels so gentle and loving. Right. So if people are gently and lovingly holding on to something like a baby bird or a baby, an actual human baby, that feels so much different than what I associate with belief, which is like arguing about politics on Facebook, you know?
Yeah.
So the first thought I have is that's a beautiful interpretation of it. And if may we all hold our beliefs that way, I think, whether you're religious or not, because I think like the first thing I was thinking is like kind of fundamentalism, the idea of holding so tightly without the ability to listen or seek to understand, I think is a primary problem with our current climate on planet Earth. It feels like is I know I'm right. If you don't think like me, you're an idiot. If that's the foundation, or I'm confident I'm right, even if I know I'm not, no, but I'm very confident. And if you don't think like me, you're probably an idiot. I think is kind of at the root of a lot of our problems. So I just love that.
Maybe.
Well, yeah, I'm trying not to live that way.
Yeah.
But believe in terms of like, are you asking what I believe about the Jesus narrative, or are you asking what I believe in general?
I think I'm asking for today. What about the Jesus narrative and Easter do you still believe in and hold dearly? And I agree with you. Like, I'm not thinking hold dearly like for dear life.
Yeah.
I'm thinking hold dearly like just value.
Yeah.
And like hold close to your heart still.
Yeah.
About the Easter story.
The biggest thing that stands out with that framing of the question is a question that I have asked for the last, I was going through some notes, even looking back to like the old Easter talks or old springtime talks, right? Jesus talks. And I think I've had this perspective for a couple of years now. One of the notes was like 2018, and so that's almost 5 years. And it's the question, what is undeniable about Jesus? And what that means is like, what would every person have to say at minimum Jesus was? Like, it seems as if everybody has to admit Jesus existed, regardless of whether you would say he's God or a Jewish reformer. Like a Jewish reformer is at minimum what he was too, right? If he existed, it seems as if he was a Jewish reformer. So even just asking that question, I feel like makes it a little bit more neutral and hopefully a little bit less charged, because I'm not trying to convince anybody or even myself of anything. Like what is just seems like, just like we'd say Alexander the Great seemed like he existed, and he seemed like he was working for, I think, Rome. Is my hunch. Like what's true of Jesus, and I think for the Easter story, what I keep coming back to is that story. What's undeniable is that like the point of that story seems to be that love is really, really tough to kill. Like if you've set out as your main goal to murder love, like you're actually probably making it worse by trying to attack it, because it feels like that's the way, like the way to make love go viral is to attack it, which is just such a really, like, if that's the Jesus story, that's a really cool version of the story to me, because like who can get into the like, why spend energy getting into like logistics of something that was unprovable? Like nobody can prove that he actually rose from the dead or didn't, or like even if I say I think I didn't, I don't think it happened, like, but I can't prove that, right? Like, so why spend energy on something that isn't undeniable? But that's the point of that story. If I were like reading that, like I read Catcher in the Rye or Of Mice and Men, like if I had to write a ninth grade, paper on this, like it seems like that's a theme of the paper, that you can't murder love, that it's exponential, it expands. If you attack it, it gets bigger. You try to squash it, it more people jump on board. There's something beautiful about that. And that's even the Harry Potter story. My daughter loves Harry Potter. I've read Harry Potter, and that's true of that story too. I think it's a timeless story, and I think it resonates with us. I'm not sure that's provable. Like if you try to murder love, that like it'll always come back stronger. I'm not sure if that's true definitively, but it certainly seems like a beautiful way to live. Like that's an inspiring way for me to live, right? That my love, if I live my life in a self-sacrificial way, that it will transcend my lifetime potentially and my personal influence, right? That to me seems like something that is worth giving my time and energy towards. So that idea is one that I would love to hold dearly, right? Like that is a interpretation of the Jesus story that I feel like many people can get on board with. And at minimum would say, if you live that way, like you're probably going to live a pretty beautiful life. At least you're going to experience a lot of love. So that's one thing. I have other thoughts on atonement. Like I think that, but maybe we shouldn't go there. What do you think? Do you want to keep going on love expands if you try to attack it, or do you want to talk about atonement? What do you think?
I don't know how long we've been talking even. I think before we do, well, I want to talk about this other idea. I want to talk about resurrection.
Okay.
I read more from the same guy.
Who's the author?
Jay
want to share
Perini.
now?
Yeah, Jay Perini. He's a professor and has written poetry and written for CNN. And
interesting.
I actually don't know that much about him, but I don't really care. If he writes something that is meaningful for me now, I will read it regardless of background. So he wrote an article and about the actual resurrection, what happened. And he used this interesting play on words that I wanted to talk to you about. It says, a large number of Christians throughout history have imagined a resuscitation, refusing to countenance the slightest hint that the resurrection should be regarded as something beyond human understanding. That we've gotten into this like frenzy of debating that Jesus actually rose from the dead and was the same person, literally, and that Thomas, had to stick his hands in his side to show. But I think the interesting thing that he pointed out that I've never really thought so much about is that no one recognized the resurrected Jesus.
Yeah.
His closest friends, the disciples, Mary Magdalene.
Yeah. Walking through walls. So this isn't like, doesn't look like me.
But they didn't even recognize him when he appeared to them.
Yeah.
And that resurrection was transforming in that he wasn't the same after. And I think for me, as I think about Easter, I think what can be hopeful about that is I feel like I said, this cycle of death and resurrection, and the idea that, I'm not sure if I believe this, but I'm going to say it. The idea that anything could be resurrected. Any person, any relationship, an idea, these things that maybe in you could seem dead can be resurrected is like a theme, I think. But I haven't thought about how, but it might not look the same.
Yeah.
It might be really different. And maybe it needs to be. But that it's not necessarily a resuscitation of like bringing something back that was before, but being open to newness
Mhm.
and something you might not even recognize
It's beautiful.
is, yeah, it's really beautiful that like it doesn't need to be Jesus's body the way it was before.
Right.
But maybe he appeared to some people in the way that they needed to. But Jesus himself seemed to enjoy that it was a mystery. You
Right.
know? He kind of,
Yeah.
I don't know, it seems like he kind of got kicks out of it of being like
Yeah.
appearing on the road to
Playing
Damascus.
pranks.
Yeah, like disappearing through the wall. And like
Right.
it kind of seems like he enjoyed the fact that it was a huge mystery.
Yeah.
And transformative in all the ways that were unexpected.
Yeah.
I like that idea. I like thinking about that. I like the hope that comes with having to let go of what something needs to look like.
I agree. I also feel like I understand why you said like I'm not sure I believe this. Like the sensitivity, or it feels vulnerable to say that that's possible
Mm-hmm.
because because it feels like um there are so many examples where like dead things die,
Yeah.
and so to also presume that resurrection is possible, a transformation of it feels as unlikely as a human raising from the dead in some instances, right? Like this is dead, this is over, and I need to like part of a positive human quality is to like accept when things are dead
Yeah.
and to like grieve them and move on. And so to know when do I
Mm.
hope for resurrection and when am I holding on too long is I think something that comes to my mind.
Well, here I remember what Selena said when I was talking about the trees outside of my window, and she said, even if the tree is actually dead,
Mm,
um, that process feeds new life anyway.
yeah,
That
just
the
not in the way you thought.
the decomposition of a tree that doesn't come back to life in the spring, the decomposition of a tree feeds the ground and the newness that is around it. And I
Hmm.
think what I thought of when you were just talking is that like I think one of the things about spring is to just notice what's new.
Yeah,
Notice the newness and be thankful for it, whether it came from something dying,
yeah,
or whether something has been resurrected or transformed. Um, we're looking for what's new, and there's hope in newness.
agreed. I love that, and I love that you brought up that point from Felina because it is transformation, right? So a tree, I
Yeah.
wanted the tree to kind of go through it to be in another cycle of the blossoms are here and the leaves are green, and that tree is dead, and it decomposes and it's now fertilizer for the next new thing that's coming. That is I mean that's Jesus, right? That's
Yeah.
transformation. That's unrecognizable, right?
Yeah.
Um, like the tree doesn't look remotely like a tree now; it looks like whatever, something else. But it's a form of transformation. I think maybe a takeaway that I'm having is that maybe the goal isn't to it's just to not place expectations on what new life looks like,
Mm-hmm.
to let it just to like observe what's new as you mentioned, and to let go of the expectations I placed on it looking exactly like I wanted it to, right? So Jesus
Yeah.
coming back looks just like Jesus. Maybe he's clean shaven, or you just gotta, his wounds are healed, or whatever, like whatever version of it. Instead, it looks like something I didn't expect, but I'm looking for new is a cool takeaway there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It might not be a resuscitation of exactly what existed before.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
feel like the big theme too that was triggering for me is the idea of salvation, right? So when you're
Mm-hmm.
talking about a resurrection, like I once was lost, but now I'm found. I once was blind, but now I see. Like that, those are sentences said about salvation, which feels like a resurrection at some point too. Because again, like if I going back to my old roots, like the point of like following this Jesus way was to be saved or to be transformed into a different version of yourself, not like Peter with a better attitude, like happy Pete for the day. Like it's supposed to be a transformed version of myself. And what's fascinating is going through my deconstruction felt like salvation. It felt like I once was blind and now I see. But to have that experience in life, like I feel like I've gone through that. I feel like I am a different version of myself than I was a decade ago. Like to have gone through a form of transformation. And so I think maybe for people listening, I would just be hopeful. Like I would assume most people have felt like they've gone through some transformations, and maybe they were moderate. But for some of us, I don't know. Wouldn't most people think they've gone through some major ones?
Yeah.
Whether it's the ending of a relationship or a new role of like all of my identity was wrapped up in my kids, and then they moved out, and then after like what's my marriage now or what's my career now, right? I job shifted or whatever. Feels like a lot of us have gone through those things, and I feel like what you're speaking to is encouraging because maybe the next chapter isn't going to look exactly like just Peter 2.0. Maybe it's completely different, and to be open to that.
I like that.
Yeah.
Being open to what transformation looks like.
Yeah. But that is an attack on our expectations, right? Here's what I want my life to look like. And I think transformation is a big speed bump often to our expectation.
Yeah.
You know?
I think, we've been talking about rituals.
Yeah.
And Easter is full of rituals. The Christian celebration of Easter, from Ash Wednesday and ash on the foreheads, practice in the Catholic Church. But you have Ash Wednesday and Maundy Thursday and Good Friday and Easter Sunday. A lot of people do the Saturday thing of like the in waiting, whatever. I don't know if there's a name for it. I think kind of what we've been talking about this whole year is, and the Christian religion has done a good job of finding rituals that remind you. And I think for me, I'm trying to figure out with each kind of new season and each holiday, what do I want my rituals to be? Are they the same ones that existed before? Often they are. And what do I want them to mean? And I think that's one of the things that maybe we can wrap up with this, of just a discussion of like, we are in control of what we think about and what we want to think about. And I think rituals are things that help us be intentional with the way that we're looking at the world, with the way we're teaching our families and our children. And so I think this is a great opportunity to look at the rituals that we're doing surrounding Easter or the spring and bring intentionality to them. And so I guess maybe I will throw to you and say, what are you going to be doing for Easter? And what's the intention that you have with them?
Yeah, I love this as a wrapping point because I do think like we're gonna do some similar things. We're gonna eat together as a family and celebrate. We're gonna host people, I'm sure, and we're gonna do our egg coloring and Easter egg hunt. And I think the thought that keeps bubbling up to the top for me is just the idea of I don't like have any memory of like any point of Easter eggs, right? I don't feel like a lot of the point of even the Jesus narrative was ever meant symbolically. It was always a very literal thing, right? So I was taught the literal version of it. And so I think I'm trying to emphasize what's undeniable about this Easter story. And so I'm gonna try to emphasize love and talk about how it's a story about how love expands. I would like to, my kids to hear the idea of like the egg and the bunny and all that stuff about being like focused on new life, and even looking around at our, like as we're looking for eggs, like notice that like there's green everywhere. There's been a lot of yellow for the last what's hilarious, I'm living over here, everything's brown and it's so dry. And so like as it gets greener, to like point out, like help them notice those things as more of a symbolic of like looking for those things in life. Right? So to help them see symbol, like my daughter Tess is old enough to understand. She was walking me through the Greek gods the other day, and she's like, "Do you know anything?" Because she's reading these other books that have these references, and I could name like three of them. And I was telling her, I'm like, I didn't grow up learning about them. Like I was told they weren't real, so I don't even know the literature behind it. So she was like explaining them, and we were like googling them because she remembered like 10 of the main 12 ones or whatever. And I was like walking her through, like, you understand metaphor versus literal, and she's like, yeah. And so she's old enough at 11 to be like to see the symbolism of an egg at this point, right? And that took me like 27 years. She's more aware of it at 11. So I think the rituals are the same, in that we're going to do the egg hunt, and we're going to do the egg coloring, and we're going to be around people we love. But I think we're going to try to emphasize the new life, and then noticing hope, and noticing new. How about for you?
Yeah, I think um yeah, I think the same. We'll be noticing the newness. And I also think there's an element too of always trying to put this in my kids, but of just being grateful. Um, being grateful that we have this life and we have this place to live, and it's so beautiful. And um, I just saw a bald eagle fly by my window while we're having
Right?
this conversation
Yeah.
of just being more open to noticing this gift of life that's all around. And spring is an incredible time to be able to do that. It's not that hard.
Right.
It's not that hard in springtime to notice the gift of new life. It might be
Yeah.
in, January. Well, my birthday's in January, so yay. That's helpful. But yeah, I just really want to emphasize to my kids and my family, like, how much gratitude I have for this life. And Easter can also be a reminder of our mortality too. That's what Ash Wednesday is about. And so that's in the back of my mind too.
Well, that this isn't forever,
It's not forever.
right? Like, enjoy this, be here,
Yeah.
because there's nothing's guaranteed.
Oh my gosh. I know we need to wrap up, but just last night I was putting my daughter to bed, and I was laying in bed with her, and she's 5.5. And just this is the way things go with her. I don't know where she reaches over and hugs me, and she goes, "I don't want you to die, Mom." And of course I was like, "Oh shoot, does she know something I don't know?" But then I was like,
I feel healthy.
I feel great. But I just had this brief conversation with her, and I was like, oh my gosh, I always want to be with you too. And I hope I get to live to be 100. But, you bring up an interesting thing, is that no one lives forever.
Yeah.
But I'm always a part of you. And then we got into a discussion about DNA. But I was like, Dad and I are a part of you forever. It's why you and I have the same eyes. And, she laughed and gave me a hug. But there is an element of that, of like, nothing lasts forever, except maybe it does. Maybe it does, as we pass, as it becomes something new, as my DNA became part of my daughter. So maybe I will never die.
Yeah.
I don't know.
There's
an Easter message for you.
I think it's beautiful. I love that note to wrap with. Just to be grateful, and to be present, and to look for all the things that we have to be grateful for, and to notice them intentionally. Like an Easter egg, to go look for things to be thankful for. Like, that's a really good takeaway, because nothing's guaranteed, and you can find things to be down about, but you could probably I bet everybody listening can find something that they're thankful for today, thankful for in their life. Hope so. And I think that's a habit or a ritual that should be included in all of the holidays, all the things that we're celebrating.
Yeah, I'm thankful for the opportunities that remind me that life is a gift.
Yeah.
Like we talk about all the time. Life is a gift and love is the point. There's no better holiday to express that than Easter, the
Yep.
story of Easter, the legend of Easter, the history of Easter. It all, myth or history, it all points to the same thing. Life is so precious, and love is the point.
I love it. I'll let that be the closing note because I think that's a fantastic way to end.
Well, thanks. Thanks for the discussion. Happy Easter.
Great discussion. Happy Easter to everybody.
Thank you for joining us. To make a donation, head to eastlakecc.com/donate.